Cineboys to Cinnamon, episode 35.
35.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Yes.
Been a while.
It's been a long old time.
Been a long old time,
Circumstance has kind of wedged its way into the regular schedule.
Yeah. Holiday, good, obviously.
Yeah.
Illness, not so good. The last vestiges of which are clinging to my lungs and esophagus. So if you hear me sort of doing my best Doc Cotton impression, so I try and laugh at many of your upcoming hilarious jokes. I apologise for that in advance. And then the TV broke.
The trifecta of disaster, apart from the holiday bit,
which was a killer. And I'm not going to watch any of the films during our exhaustive research and planning on my phone or laptop. I'm a purist.
Absolutely not. Need a cinema or cinema-esque experience.
Exactly. Yeah. This week, Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah. Scorsese,
a film we've been both looking forward to for a long time. We've had this one earmarked for a wee while. Obviously, it's Scorsese. That'll lend itself to big old chatter about his work.
Nice.
We're not going to talk too much about the famous ones because I feel like we've nattered about those in previous episodes quite a lot, and I think it's pretty well trodden ground.
Yeah, big time.
I know it's sort of like a Cineboy Cinnamon thing to retread well trodden ground, but we're going to focus on a couple of his lesser known films, After Hours and
Bringing Out the Dead.
The latter of which I haven't seen for a very long time, so we're looking forward to hear what your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I remember really liking it, but when it's been such a long time, so it'll probably like revive the film to me.
Oh, good. Okay.
Which I'm looking forward to, because I did really like it, or my memory of it. And then, of course, a review of the film itself, which, again, looking forward to talking about.
Yeah, same. It's been a little while since I've seen it, actually, but today I kind of revisited it and sort of doing some tentative research, and it all came bubbling back, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Shall we?
Let's do it.
Questing the cinematic void.
Scorsese. Scorsese.
Is that the correct pronunciation?
I have no idea.
So I think it might be. I don't know where I heard it. I heard that somewhere recently that's just the right way to say it, and everyone says it wrong.
Feel like it would be sort of disingenuous for me to attempt that, as I'm not like Italian American.
Yeah, and also like 99.6% of everyone in the world calls him Scorsese, so we'll stick to that.
Stick
for
with
now.
that, yeah.
But we've acknowledged that we know that there's an alternative phrasing for
pronunciation.
Yeah.
Kicking off the discussion then. Obviously, we'll talk about the big man himself. I put a little question out on the Instagram to sort of bring us back to the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, WD-40, the old hinges.
Indeed. And asking basically what everyone's favourite Scorsese film was.
Okay, nice.
We've got a few responses. So Dale, a regular commenter, said Wolf of Wall Street or Irishman or Taxi Driver.
Okay, yeah.
So, he's got, interestingly enough there, a couple of quite recent ones.
Yeah, too. I mean, The Irishman and Wolf of Wall Street have been both in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Which is, and also not the first, not my kind of personal first choice, especially The Irishman, which I'd seen twice and I kind of struggled with it the second time. But,
wow, okay.
I'd be actually quite interested to talk to Dale a bit further about why he's put The Irishman on his list, because I mean, I liked it and I still like it, and I think it's very, it's made the Criterion Collection.
Yes.
But I thought that might kind of fall in the middle. But there we go. Interesting.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, certainly Wolf of Wall Street is one of his the films of which has received more of a mixed critical response, I think.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see, it coming up in the discussion.
I think it fared a lot better with audiences. There's a real crowd pleaser, that film, for better and worse. Like some people massively misinterpret what that film's trying to do.
Yeah, it sort of had the same sort of thing around its Fight Club.
Exactly. Yeah.
A lot of people sort of bought into a philosophy of the film, which is based entirely on a misconception. Yeah. Which itself the film was critiquing.
Yeah.
And it's a bit strange when that happens. I mean, just as an aside, I remember working in sales, in a salesy job, and people talking about that film like it was almost like some kind of Bible for sales.
This is the problem with it.
And I remember thinking even then, like, well, that guy went to prison, what he did was illegal, but that element of his character appeared to have sort of like been glazed over in the eyes of people who had already sort of, I guess, sort of decided before watching the film that this was going to be like almost like a visual handbook for being a ruthless salesman.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, there's those scenes at the beginning which are meant to kind of signify that, oh, you're with this guy, and you kind of like, you know, his kind of ruthless, very manipulative approach to selling stock is hilarious to watch, and very, like, you know, it's DiCaprio literally like swearing at the phone.
Yeah.
You know, doing all that kind of all that spiel. Not helped by the fact it's DiCaprio, who is naturally very charismatic.
Yeah.
I think the film turns that on its head in the second half, much like a lot of Scorsese does it DiCaprio a lot. You're kind of meant to be with him, but then you're not. But yeah, unfortunately, the charisma bled into in a lot of people's eyes. It sort of made it seem like he was a hero, which is troublesome. But that's
Agreed.
not, you know, yeah. I still love the film. I think it's great.
I like the film. Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it twice. The second time, the more troubling aspects of the film, I think thematically in that context, bothered me more.
Yeah.
But I don't think Scorsese is trying. That's not his intention. I don't think he's wanting you to come away from the film thinking, God, Belfort was a genius, what a legend.
Yeah.
But I think there's enough space in the film clearly for that interpretation, which I think is why there's such a mixed critical response.
Yeah, exactly.
And The Irishman's a great choice as well. I really like the film. I've only seen it once, but as a sort of mediation on not only sort of Scorsese's own life as he's coming to the closing stages, as horrible as that is to say,
He's said that as himself,
legacy. And the gangster genre itself, which is sort of changing, and something of which Scorsese had a huge part in sculpting, certainly the Italian-American identity, or the Italian-American gangster, I should say. Those things are mutually exclusive. I don't want to get in trouble. But I think it was a really powerful sort of reflection on that. I'd like to watch it again and see if some of the sort of the only issue I remember having with the film was the de-aging. How it clearly didn't work with De Niro in the more physical aspects of his role. His
gait just wasn't up to scratch, was it? That's one of the reasons why I'm not so hot on that film. I think it has a problem with pacing as well. Like, I mean, I'm going to try to stray away from this topic because it is like it's a broken record thing. But it is really long. And I watched it in a single sitting because I kind of thought it deserved my attention for that long.
Yeah, I agree.
But I did find, and this is notably something, Killers of the Flower Moon, I don't think that suffered from it nearly as much. But my God, it is hard. It's a hard one to not pause because there's moments which naturally lapse into kind of more. Well, I guess not more. More like less exciting territory, and it's a lot more meditative and still interesting, still really well crafted
in the context of the aforementioned themes. But
I
can see that for a lot of people that would be quite make it more of a sort of a slog, I guess.
Yeah, just a difficult. It's hard to. Maybe there was just the mood I was in the second time. Again, like I said, I saw it the first time. I thought it was excellent, but I don't know. There is something to be said about that kind of blank check status he's got now, and how I don't know how he gets away with making his films so long.
I fucking love it.
Yeah,
but I could. Yeah.
It's because it's Netflix, I suppose. It's a streaming service. It doesn't matter how long they are now. Like, and even with Killers of the Flower Moon, that's Apple. So
yeah, exactly.
They're not going to care how long it is. The more, the merrier, really, isn't it? It's not like the cinema release is going to be the be all and end all of how this film makes money. So. They're probably delighted when he was like, I'm probably going to make this 3.5. Yes!
I also think as well, like, these streaming services, there's so much of a debate as to their impact on the industry. And obviously, like, there's a sort of view that streaming is sort of killing the cinematic experience. And I think the way that streaming companies offset that criticism is by employing or giving almost like a carte blanche to big, well-established, arty filmmakers to just make whatever they like.
Yeah, here's 200 million, make something that isn't for a franchise. Like,
which is unheard of. Like, the big studios away from streaming won't be doing that. And I think, that's sort of another sort of element of how complicated this sort of debate is, I guess, about the role of streaming services and the platforms and how they've impacted the way in which people engage with the art form, I guess. I think the way they offset that is by basically going, Scorsese, 3.5 hours. Yeah, fuck it.
People can pause it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's true. Sacrilege, but true.
What was Dale's third film, really quickly? Sorry.
Taxi Driver.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Goes without saying.
Yeah, straight in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Film Angle said Goodfellas and After Hours.
Oh, they said After Hours. Did
Yeah,
they?
I don't know which member of. Maybe that was both of them. One each.
Maybe they mutually have. Maybe they watched it together at some point.
Yeah.
Or maybe they've done it on their podcast. Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't think that would come up.
Well, you'll be delighted, lads, because that'll be a film of which will take up quite a big chunk of the episode. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Lydia also says Goodfellas.
Yep.
And Flynn, also a regular commenter, says Aviator.
I totally forgot about The Aviator.
Yeah.
I liked that film.
I like the film too. Again,
Yeah.
it's one that I watched a really long time ago, but I remember really liking it, and I still sort of feel it doesn't get as much love.
Yeah.
So I think he's, good
Excellent.
to bring up.
I mean, Goodfellas as well. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I really would rather, as much as I love the film, I'd rather not get into that, because type in Goodfellas podcast into Spotify and there'll be about 300 odd.
Yeah.
Same with Taxi Driver, but
And we probably waffled about those films quite a lot anyway.
I think we have. They've come up in the past, but yeah, excellent choices. Yeah.
And Ollie also, dear Ollie, Casino.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Great film.
Yeah. I mean, I liked that a lot. There's a really naff cut in it. You think you might know what cut I mean? There's a cut where Robert De Niro's getting blown up in the car. Spoilers. And he gets blown up, right? But it cuts to a dummy, and it's really obvious.
Oh yeah.
Something about that cut. One cut. The film's like 3 hours. That one cut ruins it for me.
Yeah.
But it is a great movie, and probably one of his best shot, I'd say.
Best shot, and also some of the most striking wardrobe choices.
Yeah,
De Niro looks fucking great in that film.
Yeah,
I mean,
he
he looks great in most Scorsese films.
I mean, that's how you de-age him.
Yeah, with big collars.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's good. It's good to see some people responding. Thank you very much for that. And but it's obviously he's a filmmaker that has endeared himself to so many people, not just people that are necessarily quote unquote cinephiles. He's a filmmaker that has broken outside of the confines of, not necessarily confines, but he's broken out of the sort of realm of just being like a sort of someone that art house film fans would love.
Artiste. Yeah.
And I think a lot of that boils down to sort of a lot of the sort of, obviously the films he's made, obviously. But his output is very much in line with, or has dictated a lot of like tastes, more broadly speaking. I think.
Completely. Yeah.
I think like Goodfellas, I mean, that is like the definitive gangster film. Like, most people have seen Goodfellas. If you said, I'm sort of paraphrasing the first line of the film, because I've forgotten it now. But ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a gangster.
I think that's about.
Yeah. Everyone fucking knows that line.
Yeah, and there's the shot of him running away from an explosion, which is amazing as well.
Yeah.
As a kid, he's like 12, isn't he? Yeah, that's great. Better than The Godfather, I think. Is that a controversial opinion in this day and age?
I don't know. Like, it's funny. I need to rewatch The Godfathers, because it's like films that, again, everyone tells you have to watch, and you watch them, and then you sort of never really. I haven't watched them since.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah,
so I could do, but I think in terms of enjoyment, moment to moment enjoyment, I think Goodfellas is probably better.
I'd put it this way. It's hard, isn't it? Because The Godfather is. I mean, there's a reason why it's like. Was half the planet's favourite film for so many years, but there's something about Goodfellas which is a little bit more magical. I don't know why. Like, I could chuck it on, I don't know if I could chuck The Godfather on.
I know what you mean.
And it's something fizzy about it that is a lot more tantalising. The Godfather it's like a sepia toned version of it, and but both have their merits, of course. But Goodfellas takes the biscuit for me.
Ooh, fair enough. Scorsese obviously is someone that, I don't want to say obviously he's like Tarantino explicitly, but he's a filmmaker that has a deep sort of love for the art form and is always pushing that.
Oh yeah.
And yet, despite this sort of wealth of knowledge that has clearly impacted the work that he's made, he can still have that appeal to mainstream audiences.
Yeah.
And that's where I think he's quite similar to Tarantino. I think Tarantino is far more overt in the way he sort of showcases his passion for film, in the sense that he just like lifts scenes from other films, or like motifs or ideas, or even like narratives. In the case of Django, obviously he changed a lot of it for obvious reasons, but there's not many filmmakers that can do that.
No, yeah, you're right. They've got such a like stark appreciation for the art form, going back to effectively its conception. He's using all these tropes and kind of clearly learnt a lot from a lot of films in sort of the 30s and 40s. But he kind of, you can tell that he also knows he's got to play to an audience as well. So he peppers it with technological innovation sometimes. Like in the case of The Irishman, some of it was dodgy and it didn't really work, but the whole face replacement stuff, that was all new. Like Hugo, he's done 3D and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a really interesting mix, and you can tell he sort of learnt, as you watch his filmography in sequence, you can tell he's sort of learning stuff.
And growing as well in terms of relationship with the themes that tend to permeate through most of his films.
And
that's another thing which I love so much about him. Like, even the films that feel sort of so far removed from his experience are still sort of deeply personal films. They feel personal. Ideas of like faith. That's one of the strongest themes in all of his films. Criminality, violence, these things that...
Loneliness as well.
Loneliness,
quite often,
These are things that obviously in and around his life for a real long time. And I think it's really interesting that he can sort of make these things feel so personal, while sort of fusing that with a deep reverence and love for the medium, and making it immediately apparent, I do think his later films, after sort of Wolf of Wall Street, are going back to sort of maybe away from like that, from that mainstream appeal. I think films like Silence, I don't know, was that before or after Wolf of Wall Street?
It was after. It was his next one after.
Yeah, it was, that's right, yeah. So Silence and The Irishman, these films are not necessarily the kind of films that are going to sculpt the landscape of the medium in the way Goodfellas and Taxi Driver did.
No,
but I think that there's something in that, in him as a filmmaker, responding to the sort of changes, the seismic changes in the industry. He's been very vocal about his criticisms of like Marvel, and the way like the cinema is going, and he's been talking a lot about streaming as well. So he is someone that obviously is very passionate about it, and he's possibly alienated a lot of potential people in terms of like people, like fans, because I think we sort of talked about that before, and particularly with his criticisms of Marvel, I don't think his criticisms were that sort of like scathing, but it was enough for a lot of people to bite back at him, wasn't it?
Massively, yeah. That was a strange, odd thing. I mean, what he said is entirely justified as well. It doesn't matter. He didn't say everyone who loves theme parks are idiots. He just said they're like theme parks, aka they're like, they're created for mass appeal, mass consumption. That's what he meant by it. I don't think he meant to say you're all stupid for going to watch these instead of my films. Like, I think he was just he was trying to drive a wedge through the medium, I guess, in that, like, you have these films, these are the kind of films I like to make, and people like David Fincher like to make, and like, a lot of other directors want to do. This is the kind of stuff we want to do. And then you have this as well, which is like, just so this is like mass produced for like mass consumption. That I don't think he was criticizing them.
He definitely doesn't like them. I think it's immediately apparent. I mean, not that I know him, but we did have to speak on the bar. I do think it to me anyway, it feels really apparent that he really doesn't like those films, and I think he was being quite measured in his criticism, considering that he's really passionate about this. And it matters to him a lot that, people can engage with a wide variety of films from a wide variety of eras and cultures. And the presence of a huge billion-dollar sort of interlinked franchise that not only dominates Hollywood, but dominates the minds of every other studio to try and replicate. It's clearly going to have an impact on the viewing habits of audiences worldwide, but also cinema owners or cinema companies themselves. They're not going to take a punt as regularly or as willingly when they know that Spider-Man 8. We'll give them, get the sort of bums on seats. So I think his criticisms, as you say, are valid. They are mass mainstream appeal. We don't want to sort of talk about this too much because we talk about it a lot and have done and probably will do in later episodes. But I think in the context of our discussion, which is of course about him more overtly, I think, and in the context of his films, I think that they almost feel like more overt in response to that. And I don't know if that's necessarily true or fair to say, but we were talking earlier about the runtime in his films. Like, obviously he's always had quite long movies, but the fact that these are quite long, I don't know, it almost feels like a sort of like, no, you're going to sit and watch this. You're going to sit and enjoy this. If you this is like a fucking film, a proper film.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's arrogant, because he never really comes across that arrogant to me in interviews. But then I am aware that I sort of love him quite a lot, so maybe I don't want to sort of superimpose negative traits on him. But I think he is just passionate, and I think he just wants people to remember that there is so much more to offer.
Yeah. I think I think it could be mistaken for arrogance how he speaks, but he just loves it. He clearly loves it. He doesn't want to talk about anything else.
Yeah,
literally, he just wants to talk about cinema, and he says that word in literally every single interview. Yeah, I kind of love that, and the way he pronounces it as well is so eloquent. He is very much a purist, and I admire him greatly for that. Yeah. And I agree with a lot he has to say about Marvel, more so in like the recent years, and the release of old The Marvels, which is not done well. I'm sure he's rubbing his hands together about that. Like, yes, lowest domestic over, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's not looking good for the franchise there. But no, I think it's interesting, and thinking about him, in terms of his own influence, as it's seismic, right?
Yeah,
he's a new Hollywood.
Guy Ritchie basically nicked his idea, and nobody noticed for ages, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's crazy, and a lot of people kind of even his camera work and stuff. I forgot how unique his camera work can be, and that's present in like even his early work, like After Hours and Mean Streets and stuff. Like he does that kind of dolly zoom really quick. And there's one in Killers of the Flower Moon, which is on Brendan Fraser, which is great. It doesn't do it a lot, but when he does, you're like, oh, that's like a kind of Scorsese-esque zoom. I tried to do one once, did not work. I had to do it probably because I did it with an office chair. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm sure he wouldn't fault you for trying.
Wait for that email.
Yeah,
please.
He was New Hollywood, right? He was like the filmmaker, the right filmmaker for the new movement of cinema.
Yes, yeah.
That sort of more introspective, critical cinema.
Yeah,
and I think even in his more sort of stylistically or thematically exuberant films, I think there is a very sort of, he's always almost visualizing this chronology of America. Do you know what I mean? Like,
okay, yeah.
And I think that's why Killers of the Flower Moon is so important, because it is about a period of time, a period of history which perhaps isn't so well known through the lens of a genre that almost contributed to why it's so unknown, or why there's such a warped revisionism of the history around that period.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting that he made this film in that context.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's, even with like After Hours, it is like arguably one of the wackier films in his filmography.
Yes,
and I know wacky sounds a bit cheap in the context of the discussion, because I think the film is, as sort of weirdly hilarious and as it is also quite a dark and sad movie.
And
it's very
cynical.
critical of very sort of the kind of themes and ideas that I think some of his other films deal with quite well.
Yeah, but it's like he's put those ideas onto basically like planes, trains, and automobiles, and just in the sense that there's a guy who can't catch a break, and everything is going wrong for him, and everything that he tries, like in order to get to his destination. In case of planes, trains, it's his house in both cases. But with Scorsese's like version of that, I think Planes, Trains was actually made afterwards, but it's kind of mixed in with his trademark cynicism and sort of trademark dark alley seediness. I don't mean he's seedy. I mean like his shots are quite often just present a really bleak, nightmarish view of city life.
But it's also quite sort of, because it's always, obviously After Hours is set in New York, as a few of his other films are, and even though there is this sort of view which as you say focuses on the sort of dark underbelly of urban life, there's a romantic view as well. There's an infatuation, because it's a city that he loves. He was born there, he was raised there. I don't know if he was born there, actually. I know he was raised there, but it's I should have done the research. But there's a love there too.
Yeah,
which we even feel in like Taxi Driver, which is really strange given that a lot of the film is seen from the perspective of Travis Bickle as he just creeps around the streets in his taxi, which is this vessel which is just filled full of like hatred and all of the sort of emotions that have come as a result of being alienated and spit on and left to sort of rot. But even through that lens, there's something still sort of vaguely romantic about the city. I don't know. I don't know if I'm sort of reading into it a bit too much.
No, I think you're right. It's funny, like if you walk around a city at night and you can't, it's like simultaneously terrifying and beautiful.
Yeah,
so you see all these constructions, these glittering out of focus lights and stuff like that, and you're like, that's amazing. But also, I feel so isolated and lonely.
Yeah.
It's a very there's a sort of juxtaposition there that's quite confusing, and he is really good at communicating that.
That's a good point. Yeah, man. I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Come here, you.
Didn't even write that down. That came from the soul.
Came from the soul. That's what you get from Cineboys to Cinema. Pure soul. Let's talk about After Hours a little bit then, because for me, my sort of journey with this film, if you will, is it's like a film that I've always really wanted to watch and never been able to watch it, never been able to catch it. It's never played in the cinemas. At least I've never seen it play in a cinema nearby. And it never had like an English DVD or Blu-ray release. And if it did, it was super fucking hard to find.
Yeah, okay, I can imagine that, because it's fallen. In terms of filmography, he sort of outdid himself quite quickly after that, I suppose.
It's not one that, like, when you say, Scorsese, very few people, apart from the film angle, would say After Hours, But Criterion, lo and behold,
there we go,
plugging them. But they released it, and I bought it immediately, knowing that obviously we were going to do this episode, and also just being incredibly curious about this film. And it's a curiosity that intensified in very much the same way that Freakin' Sorcerer. There was no way to access it in England, and when they released it on Blu-ray, like, it just my interest went like skyrocketed. As soon as it arrived, I was like, I've got to watch this film. And I just was sort of blown away by how good it was.
It's fantastic, isn't it? It is. There are moments of overt humour. Mainly, it's Griffin Dunn, isn't it?
Yeah.
Griffin Dunn, I'm not sure.
Something like that.
He plays it reasonably straight, but is also, the whole thing surrounding his character is just almost permanently exasperated.
Yeah.
He's not a tremendously nice guy. I think he's sort of semi-well intentioned, although also quite clearly looking for sex. That's sort of how his night starts, is that he meets a nice girl in a cafe and he's like, quids in, basically. That's what, he's a bit of a yuppie in that sense. But
he's a sort of poster boy for the sort of the 80s, like, white collar story of success, isn't he?
Yeah, wannabe Belfort. He's never going to really rise the ranks. So he presumably wants some sort of quick release, I guess,
or an escape.
And it all goes very south after a series of events, some his fault, some not, but he's kind of always involved in them, and the actions that he takes never lead to anything good. And the girl that he's initially trying to pursue, she dies, right?
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoiler alert. And it sets off this chain of events which leads to him basically not being able to get home. And it's just kind of about his evening, really, and how he reacts to certain things and the people he bumps into, including, and this is weirdly a kind of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon-esque roundabout way going back to John Hughes. Catherine O'Hara He's in Home Alone.
Yeah.
And also Kevin's dad. I can't remember the name of the actor.
Oh God, yeah.
He's in it as well. And you're like, they're both
in
in fucking Home Alone.
Oh,
John Hughes obviously produced Home Alone, and he also plays trains and automobiles. So
There we
kind
go.
of all circles back round.
Yes.
But it's a great film. After Hours, it's quite chrome looking, sort of desaturated,
Very 80s.
Yeah,
It's sort of indicative of the 80s, isn't it?
And it's the kind of film where you're like, okay, you can have someone literally die, relatively central character like die in the first act, and also have Catherine O'Hara speeding around in an ice cream truck looking for him in a kind of screwball way, and it exists in the same film. It's really strange. I loved it. Thought it was great.
I think it's interesting you sort of pointed out the sort of main character, his sort of desire to escape, because I think it's really interesting. It's quite a telling part of the film in terms of the view of that sort of white collar worker.
Yeah.
Because at the start of the film, it's very explicitly clear that he is obviously drowning in the sort of bureaucracy of this job and the soulless nature of the job. Yeah, and all of the sort of subsequent success that he gets from that role does nothing. It doesn't give him any joy or any happiness. Yeah, and there's just this gnawing sense of loneliness and alienation that comes from this way of life that everyone tells you is the life to have. It's a very sort of common critical angle to take, I guess. What the film does very interestingly with that, though, is that he goes out and he goes, fuck it, I am going to go find this girl. I am going to have a wild night. I'm going to break free from and behave in a way which people who have had who crave my success or have my success would think ill of. And then he sort of dips his toe in this sort of like darker side of life and immediately wants to retreat back to the life that he claims to sort of hate. Yeah. And it really reminded me, have you ever seen the film Lost in America?
I have not, no.
It's like Albert Brooks comedy. Not, again, sort of saw it fairly recently, but it is sort of about that. It's about that sort of desire to escape this way of life, like the well-entrenched sort of hyper excessive capitalism of the 1980s and how soul destroying it is. But there's an element of comfort there,
right,
that is almost sort of forgotten about until these characters are in a position of strife, and then they go, oh shit, and they panic and they try to live off the beaten track. I'm sort of very speedily talking about a film which is fantastic. I really advise you to check it out. And again, it sort of talks about that, and it almost makes the criticism of the system more, it lingers with you more and it hits you harder, because even the desire to escape is almost sort of cultivated by the same system, and it makes it even more inescapable, and it's sort of more depressing.
Okay.
That even the desire to escape, either you retreat back to it because it's the only thing you know and it gives you that comfort that you sort of hate. Yeah. Or even like the methods of escape are as a result of that system that you want to break away from. It's really sad, and I think it left me with a similar feeling to that in After Hours. It felt like that.
Like the cyclical nature of the narrative, in that he literally gets dropped off at his work. Like he's in the most ridiculous
I do remember
scenario.
Thinking, how's this film going to end? It's perfect, right?
It's fantastic. Yeah. There's also a great thing he does with the office scenes at the beginning and the end, and the camera like properly swoops round everywhere. And it's like the most exciting camera work you can see, and yet because of the setting, it's still boring. I think that was really intentional, where it's just swooping around this office, like whoa, look at this, and it's just all beige nonsense. I think that's very intentional. There's also throughout the film that sort of a recurring motif that he's looking at his watch, and that definitely speaks to what you were saying about him instantly regretting wanting to go out and having like a wild night and break free of the constraints that he's kind of built for himself. Yet, as soon as he gets there, he's just looking at his watch the whole time. He's like, I've got to keep time still. Like, there's something about him which I think, as much as he'd hate to admit it to himself, he likes the lifestyle, and or at least he feels comforted by the yuppie lifestyle. More so than he thinks. So
which is really sad.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and Griffin Dunne plays it brilliantly.
He's brilliant in it,
It's very funny. He's great. I mean, if you're an American Werewolf fan, it's a delight to watch him in a different role.
I thought that.
Not ripped to shreds as well.
there's also like a real sort of one of the most common phrases I heard after watching the film or read was that the film was very Kafkaesque.
Okay, yeah.
And I think sometimes these sort of statements can be banded around willy-nilly, and I think, okay, like the word surreal.
Right,
like I'm sort of hyper aware of using the word surreal because it's a word that's sort of quite overused.
Yeah.
And I panic about using it, especially when you're sort of on a film podcast and it's there forever. You know, oh shit, I said it again. But Kafkaesque is something that comes up quite a lot, and I think to me this film is like one of the best representations of that idea. Yeah. And it's sort of like that process of disempowerment via like emasculation. I think it's a very emasculating film.
Yeah, big time.
Through like the obscurification of the motivations of the characters he meets. So there's no real sort of clear idea of like what the characters are going through and what sort of dictates their behaviour. A lot of the characters he meets, they're in the sort of in the throngs of something in their life, and he's sort of swept up in it and taken in the current with it. And he has no control and no power. And as someone that is his white-collar worker is probably used to quite a lot of control and power in some aspects of his life. There's something quite demasculating out from that perspective. And that obscurification narratively lends itself to the sort of idea of the Kafkaesque critique of bureaucracy or any aspect of like, the increasingly modern world. The whole point is that if you think about chiefly of his critique of bureaucracy, it's that every person knows a little bit about something, but no one knows enough about the whole picture. So like, I think that's something that is sort of really chilling about the human experience collectively. That it can feel like omnipresent, but never quite sort of properly connected.
Right.
I don't know. Like it just really in that sense, the film felt really quite powerful. And a really sort of one of the best representations of that feeling of powerlessness, that feeling that we've all had when you're trying to like deal with like a big, like, not to sort of cheapen the discussion about Kafka, but to bring it to an everyday context, that feeling of disempowerment you feel when you're like being wrong done by a business or a big company and you're trying to speak to someone and you can never get the information you need or anything like that. Like, I think by its nature is quite disempowering, and I think that's like a tiny sort of feeling of that is the kind of thing that Kafka was really trying to really sort of zero in on, and how sort of disempowering it is and how terrifying it is to be lost in something that no one really quite knows what's going on, but somehow it still exists and still goes on. And there's something really horrible about that.
You're passed from person to person, aren't you? Which kind of happens in After Hours. You just sort of flits between people and gets absolutely nowhere. He has experiences, but there's never a resolution to his kind of angst. And it's always just, it's never ending. It's the night seemingly is never ending. It's very kind of can't say it, Kafkaesque. Definitely, we've said it a lot now. But also the bit where he gets plastered in newspaper and then breaks free of it. That's kind of weirdly, I don't know, metamorphosis or whatever. Breaking free of it, but then I guess the joke is that he hasn't actually broken free of anything. I think that's the joke anyway.
Well, we come here for the hot takes.
Yes.
And that's your hot take. Oh. No, I just think it's a really fascinating movie in that context. It's testament to the presentation of those ideas and the way Scorsese again implements his own stylistic and thematic sensibilities into the film, that a film that feels, again, quote unquote, wacky in the context of against his other movies. It feels like quite relatable, that sense of disempowerment, the sense of sort of feeling lost amongst it all. And then there being a greater level of sadness of, even though you're lost amongst it all, you're still sort of comfortable. There's like, the crumbs of comfort that you snatch on and hold on to. I don't know, quite sad. I think.
It is quite a sad film. I was sadder than I thought, because I was recommended to it as if it was a comedy. Someone, Alfie, recommended it to me.
He's a big fan of it, isn't he?
And I was struck by how sort of there was a streak of bitterness about it, which is, I mean, not to the film's detriment at all, but it was disarming. That I think a lot of Scorsese films are about a sort of moral sickness, be it like a
individual moral sickness of like one character, i.e. Taxi Driver, or like a collective moral sickness like organised crime.
Yeah.
And how that relationship with the organised crime has with the wider state is reflective of a broader moral sickness within the sort of economic or social systems that facilitate it. You know, I think his films are very, anchored in that.
I mean, Killers of the Flower Moon, you know, the destruction of First Nations, like that is the ultimate moral sickness.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's at the birth of America, right? The birth of not just the America that we know now, but, you know, not to get sort of too highfalutin, but wanky, but the economic system that we live in now.
Yeah. Sort of started there, really.
Really burst then, didn't it?
Yeah.
In the way in which we know it, or start to know it. Yeah, great film, really good.
Yeah.
Beautifully shot as well, beautiful.
Oh yeah, really surprisingly, just how nice it sort of burst. I watched it on Amazon. Amazon is notorious for shitty transfers.
Yeah,
Still looked amazing.
There you
I'm
go.
sure the Criteria Blu-ray looked better, but
Oh
on
the new TV as well, filmmaker mode. Fucking hell.
Nice, yeah.
I was like shouting upstairs, Georgia, come look. I was like, you care.
The saturation in these blues.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. As the cinematographer intended, presumably.
Excellent film. Again, lesser known.
Seek it out. It is on Amazon, but get it on Blu-ray.
I didn't know it was on Amazon.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I was surprised by that as well. But you had to rent it. It was like £2.50.
Worth it.
Yeah, completely
worth it. Let's move on to one of the other sort of two lesser-known Scorsese films we'll talk about, and that is Bringing Out the Dead.
Yes.
A film, as sort of alluded to in the intro, been a long time since I've seen it. I remember having like a sort of a really brief conversation with some at university about it, and he was saying about how it was like low-key one of Scorsese's best films with Nick Cage, and I'd never heard of it until someone spoke to me about it, and then I watched it straight after that, got it on DVD from I can't remember where, and then that's the last time I've seen it, so
oh really? Okay.
My memory of it's pretty shaky, so I'm interested to
hear
what you have to say about it.
So yeah, it's sort of a kind of cousin to Taxi Driver in a sense, in that it's about an ambulance driver played by Nicolas Cage who is suffering from burnout. I think that's the difference between him and Travis Bickle, is that he's kind of a good person at heart. He's almost like a fallen angel, though, in the sense that go back to Scorsese's religious allegory. There is some really overt religious moments in this film. There's kind of, you know, down to the medical symbol, the cross, the red cross, and then how that kind of is transplanted from the cross, as in. Yeah. Although I know Scorsese is more of a Catholic upbringing, there is still some parallels there. Anyway, so it's just about someone who's burnt out because of New York City. He's driving around at night with his like mate who's also in the ambulance with him, and it's just there's like an opioid epidemic that's hit the streets of New York. I think it's called like Red Death or something. It's this new brand of heroin.
Oh yeah, that rings a bell. Something like that.
And as a result, all of the ERs are rammed, and it's as the film has this real frenetic energy, which is quite overwhelming even for Scorsese. And so you're kind of with this character, I think his name's Frank, on this sort of journey into the descent to hell, but born out of a kind of a want and a need to help people. And it's great. And along the way he meets Patricia Arquette, but because he's sort of suffering from all sorts, like he can't sleep, he's depressed, he's like not eating, all he thinks about is his job and his desire to help people. And as a result, he kind of meets this woman, but he can't connect with her. And again, the classic themes are all there, right? Loneliness, social isolation.
It's the backdrop of like a sort of a very literal and thematic sickness with the drug epidemic.
Completely. And you know, unlike your typical mainstream movie, it doesn't ever resolve itself, and that's the case with quite a lot of Scorsese films. With the notable exception of something like The Aviator, which ends in a kind of almost ridiculous amount of grandiosity. But with the majority of his films, there is always, it's almost like the only thing that can bring them out of this is circumstance. It's nothing that they can really do themselves, because they've been trying and trying and trying throughout the film to kind of become the person they want to be, and it's never going to happen. The catharsis is going to come from acceptance, not from a resolution of anything. Bringing Out the Dead's really good for that kind of thing. It's funny though. I can see why the film fell by the wayside. It's hard to market. They should have lent more into Taxi Driver, I think, when they were marketing it. It was like a bit of a financial failure, a bit of a dud, and nobody really remembers it. It's not got any like prestigious releases recently or anything like that. It's just kind of, it's on Netflix, you know. It's just sort of there. And I think a lot of people took issue with the fact that there was no real resolution or anything like that.
Okay.
But it is, I think it's great. I think it's really energetic, but in a quite a negative way. And if you're in the right mood, you know, watching someone spiral into chaos and uncertainty, then it is. It's great. Yeah. It's really good.
The sort of. I remember that the sort of the freneticism of the camera, the editing. Thelma Schumacher, right? I assume.
I think
a long time collaborator.
Yeah,
and I think a huge part of the reason why those films are his films are so fucking good. You know?
Oh yeah, she's great.
You know, that freneticism is almost a very sort of overt but necessary representation of the way that the sort of mind that is besieged by so many different things is operating, and how it works, and how it perceives certainly the passage of time, interactions with others. You know, and I remember thinking that was a really effective visual thing. Obviously all films will do that to varying degrees, but I think
this turns out to 11 though. Like, exactly. It's exhausting to watch. It's like, you know, if you've had a day at work that's just so hectic, you're doing 6 things at once and you don't feel like it's ever going to end, and then it finally somehow does, and you leave and you feel like you haven't done anything. It's like that feeling in the film, and it's presumably what Nicolas Cage's character Frank is feeling, because there's a recurring motif in him. He's never able to save anyone, and that's quite a horrible sort of theme in the film, this recurring theme that he can't, like, everyone is dying on his watch. And yet he's so burnt out and so like wired toward, like, careening towards a goal of being able to save someone, and it never happens. And you know, like, the low-key British version would be me coming out of work being like, fuck me, that was exhausting. Don't feel like I got anything done though. Let's hope tomorrow's better, you know, that kind of thing. It's great. Both After Hours and Bringing Out the Dead, definite recommendations from us too, I think.
Absolutely. I need to rewatch Bringing Out the Dead. I do have it, I think, on DVD, but like, as you say, no major re-release.
No, I hope they do. I hope someone because with After Hours come out on Blu-ray, like, it's sort of a signifier of a lost gem in Scorsese's filmography, and this is absolutely the same thing, and it's got real merit.
100%. Yeah,
I'm just waiting for someone to, you know, someone who presumably recommends this stuff to Criterion or whoever, like, to kind of give it another release, because it deserves it wholeheartedly.
Real belter. Let's move on to Killers of the Flower Moon then. Something we'd earmarked for a long old time. And, you know, I remember sort of reading, I'd really try my best not to sort of engage too much with the sort of like reviews or sort of buzz around the film that I'm really looking forward to, out of just this sort of fear that you're going to something's going to sort of spill out and spoil it for you. Or create an expectation or
something that you might be worried about. Like, that could be a review that's perhaps a bit lukewarm or even negative, and then you watch it and you're like, fuck, they're right, you know, and it kind of ruins the experience. I totally see where you're coming from, just, you know.
But the early buzz, you know, I think it played at Cannes and everyone loved it. And it was a film that, you know, I think it was, out of all of his newest films, I think has probably garnered the sort of strongest critical response, I'd say. I mean, I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. If strolled onto Rotten Tomatoes, that might not be the case, but I just feel like, in comparison to like the reception to The Irishman or to Silence, you know, it's certainly a film that I think has garnered the kind of responses that he's probably more used to in his early work. I don't know.
I
feel that. I just feel that about it. I think given the sort of nature of the film and its sort of themes and ideas, it's obviously very much a part of the discussion in Hollywood now.
Yeah.
In terms of like representation, or indeed sort of uncovering parts of history that have been previously obscured.
Yeah, oh yeah, I was great for that.
And I think that's possibly part of the reason why it's garnered so much success.
I think so. I think Scorsese is almost separate from that sort of idea of being woke. You know what I mean? But he's always been a champion of, like, you know, if you want to cast some Native American, cast some. There's a giant talent pool there still. And,
of course, yeah.
Sort of similar to, you know, Prey. And Prey came out.
Yeah.
This is about like First Nations and stuff. Okay, it's really interesting. And there's sort of an almost there's a resurgence in interest as to, you know, that period of history, which perhaps hasn't been, certainly in the cinematic sense, hasn't really been around since something like Dances with Wolves.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I think it's, you know, we'll sort of talk about this now, I guess, in terms of the context of the genre to which most people would be familiar with First Nation natives would be like the Western. And of course, you know, the Western, you know, in terms of classic Hollywood, I'm sure we've talked about this a lot, so I want to sort of bang the point too much, but the Western was the genre to which the American film industry held American ideals aloft to the world. The taming the West is the perfect metaphor for that sort of American spirit. You know, that sort of sense of freedom and bravery.
Yeah,
you know, all those sorts of things that they want to attribute to themselves. The Western was the perfect genre in which to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's especially interesting that Scorsese uses the Western for the opposite.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, completely. Yeah.
You know, to instead pick apart the horrors underneath that sort of enviable facade that the Western was so desperate to construct in terms of how people, you know, the rest of the world views America. And how, indeed, you know, the power structures in charge of America would have been very keen for the world to see. Yeah. Even if you think, I think we've talked about this before as well, like 80s and action films, like that sort of Reagan hard-body thing. Like, yeah, it almost feels like there's an alignment between the sort of political power at the time and the messages of the films, the mainstream films that are coming out.
Yeah.
And it would have been especially the case in classic Hollywood at that time, as obviously studios had a lot more power over the creative process, and obviously they were probably a lot more sort of entrenched in that sort of conservative traditional ideology that seeked so desperately to sort of show to the world how pure and brilliant America was. So I think it's really cool that cool. Has that been a while?
You're cool, Scorsese.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Cheers. That's it. And
your movie's cool.
Outro. You know, it's really fascinating that Scorsese uses the genre for something to sort of unpack the darkness that was so readily obscured by a lot of those movies at the time. Oh yeah,
I mean, the whole thing about it is it's like, it's just a period of history that. So yeah, despite at school learning about Native Americans, this whole idea of, you know, the homesteaders coming around and imposing a giant cultural change really, really quickly was still slightly alien to me.
Yeah.
And so to see it, you know, that on screen is really, really interesting and really fascinating, and hammers home, you know, the idea that the invaders' attitude to the invaders is still really horrendous even after they've been invaded successfully. And, you know, and even when the invaded have benefited financially from like a social structure that was forced on them, the idea is live by our rules and we'll leave you alone. But oh wait, no. You know, our rules have made you really rich. Yeah. So we're going to change the rules now. So, and like steal your wealth from you. It's like, and this all happened, and it was such a blind spot for me before. So it was really interesting seeing that on screen. From, you know, from the film having like a strong moral stance against all of this, that was really refreshing to see as well. It's just, I don't know if enjoyable is the right word. Maybe it is, because learning new stuff is enjoyable, and that was really enjoyable to watch, I guess. Like you can kind of sit there and be outraged and want to be a better person as a result of it, even if it's temporary, as we've got discussed. That was just a really fascinating element of the film.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you pick up on the idea of the wealth that the Osage people receive as a result of having oil on their land.
Yes, that's it, yeah.
Because it's like, it's a wealth that they have, but it's almost like they have to play wealth by the white man settlers' rules. It's almost like, and it's that wealth that makes them easier to pick off, because they drift further. It drifts them further and further away from their traditions and their heritage and their culture. There's a lot of sort of explicit mentions of that in the scenes where all like the sort of heads of the family come together and sort of verbalize their sort of frustration about the situation they're living in. And there's they're basically saying this money's kind of polluted them. They've still got to play by the white man settlers' rules. The wealth. They start to dress the same, act the same, and they surrender to vices more readily, and it makes them more susceptible or easier to be picked off or to be influenced, or to have to be very, very quite literally their way of life diluted. by the settlers.
It's there's a scene in the film. It's probably my favourite scenes. It's where Leonardo DiCaprio, who is at this point married to Lily Gladstone's character. Lily Gladstone being of Native American origin, I suppose. At this point, you could, although maybe she was born into it when it was a lot more pure, and it's since been taken over slightly by the sort of more Western ideals. And DiCaprio is so angry that she doesn't want to take insulin, that he has a big fucking tantrum, and it's horrible. That was when it turned for me, actually, with his character. I was like, okay, I'm not with you anymore. There's something really morally bankrupt and horrible about you that I can't follow. I think that's meant to be the case, but I think that scene is just it serves as an example of the behaviour that was going on all around them. Is just like, no, you must do it our way, even if you have benefited massively from us, from the rules that we ourselves have created. You still have to do it our way. And in the case of this, although medically speaking, it probably is good that she would have been on this insulin, it's the fact that she has her reasons, her cultural reasons for not wanting to subscribe wholly to this new
Western medicine.
And his response is just so vile and horrific, and that's what was going on everywhere. In a broader sense, that is what was happening to all of the First Nations people and the Osage people. It was just, they were getting poisoned by a new way of living that was almost impossible to resist. Sort of overwhelmed and outnumbered, I suppose. And that scene, I mean, it's just, I think that's probably my favourite scene for that reason.
It's sort of like it's not just a genocide in the literal sense of people being murdered en masse, and the systems in place that are allegedly there to protect them aren't there. It's more like illusory. But there's also like a sort of cultural genocide. It's like the destruction of their values, and it's all very almost deliberate from the perspective of the settler. They're very much like slowly diluting, as I said before, slowly polluting it, and slowly sort of driving a wedge between these people and their values. And in the case, Robert De Niro's character is very much.
He's a piece of shit.
He's the biggest piece of shit in the film. He's the architect of that. He's like tricking them into thinking that he's like friends with them, but really he's just slowly infecting them, making their lives worse, and taking them further away from their culture and their values, and manipulating them. And and he also manipulates DiCaprio's character. I mean, DiCaprio's character in this he's an idiot. He's not a smart guy.
He's a puppet, isn't he?
He's a puppet, and again, that doesn't make his behaviour excusable, because by the end he is just fucking awful. And he does do pretty terrible things. He does do pretty terrible things from the outset, but you get this sense that there's this sort of this complicitness in it is born out of ignorance. It's also born out of fear. And it's also born out of like a sense of wanting a slice of something that you feel you're owed. And it's something that's greatly amplified by this idea. Well, I'm the settler and you're this. Why have you got that? It should be mine. And that's really interesting. And it focuses on that idea, and actually leads me to a question. I want to give you on the basis of that, because there has been some criticism leveled towards the film. About not presenting the perspective from the Osage enough. And it being a lot more white centric. I wonder what your thought process was on that, because I don't know, I've got my view, but I wonder what you thought.
No, yeah, you're right. I think its star power might be slightly the reason why people think that. Obviously, DiCaprio being a star of huge star.
Yeah.
And the story does focus quite a lot on him.
Mm-hmm.
Lily Gladstone gets plenty of screen time.
Mm-hmm.
She is bedridden for a lot of it, though.
Yeah.
And that is, it's a plot thing. That's a narrative thing, and it that doesn't need to happen because that's what happened. But it does. It is to the detriment of perhaps the perspective of the Assange people a little bit. And we do linger on William Hale, Robert De Niro playing.
Oh yeah, William Hale. Yeah.
And DiCaprio's character quite a lot, and it's about their scheme quite a lot, and it almost teeters on the Wolf of Wall Street thing slightly of being like, what? Who am I meant to be rooting for here? Luckily, it is a lot more clear cut by the end, especially. And you said something interesting to me not too long ago about DiCaprio looking increasingly gaunt and ghoulish.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a deliberate thing there of your allegiance is slowly slipping away from him and his plight.
Yeah. Change his teeth. I mean, he did it in Django, didn't they?
Yeah. I don't know if it could have been done any other way. That's really interesting, actually. I know those criticisms have been levelled on the film.
Yeah, I think that whilst, of course, it is addressing a period of history and a very horrible period of history, bringing it to the forefront in a way which, to many people which may not know a great deal about it, I think predominantly it is about that sort of from the perspective of the settler, from the colonizer, from the oppressor in this situation.
Yeah,
and how the way it is reflected on is riddled by guilt. Yeah, and a lot of the later stages of the film, DiCaprio is riddled by guilt.
Yes.
But his guilt prevents him from being honest with her. There's that bit in the film where she says, because obviously he's been poisoning her slowly whilst giving her insulin.
Yep.
And she asks him, what were you putting in the syringe? And he just says insulin.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that guilt is preventing him from properly being honest with her and possibly reconnecting with her on the basis of that. And I think that to me spoke about the film's perspective and why I think it was important that it focused on that, because again, there's the opposite argument is valid, absolutely, but I just feel that the film is about that white perspective on that as the perpetrator.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't think the film necessarily sugarcoats that, really.
No,
I don't think any of the characters come out looking particularly good.
No, not really. No,
as they should. Terrible.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Scorsese is focusing on. I think obviously the elements of the injustice that those people had to endure during that period. Obviously, it makes it harder to sort of balance that out with the mediations on the kind of guilt. Through the complicity. Sorry, DiCaprio's character chiefly.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we have films that focus on that perspective, because it's a perspective that is seldom really sort of. Obviously, we need to have films from the perspective of the people that suffer this injustice and this horror. But I think to have it from this opposite side also, I think, is quite important and quite interesting. And I think it should be used to stimulate discussions nowadays from our perspective about our history and about how that has informed the way we live now. And I think that's something that's really important and is all too often ignored. If you think about it in the context of sort of going a bit off piece here, but in the context of English history and colonialism, it's not something that's really lingered on for very long.
No, it's something that I've only recently started to delve into a bit more. It's mental, Ireland and even Australia and stuff.
I mean, there's lots of horrible
things
stuff that's been done, and a lot of the horrible stuff is part of the reason why, is the reason why England is the powerhouse it was, and the its position that it holds globally, although it's definitely dwindling, is still significant enough.
All those countries had to take it back, though. It's funny, we never gave it to them.
Exactly.
It's horrible when you look at it and you're like, they had to fight for their independence. It's not like oh yeah, we were horrible, here you go. They had to actively fight for that, and it's
or it was like we were so financially knackered from the war that we sort of went,
Yeah, it
We've
was
taken
never
everything we can from you now. Like, you know,
never came from a place of love, did it? It's nasty.
There was no altruism.
Yeah, but
I think that's why it's interesting. Sort of going a bit off piece there, but I think
no.
I think that's why it's important that the film has that perspective, and I think it's interesting that it was from that perspective.
Yes, I think it needed to be, and I think the story would have been a lot shorter and a lot different. I mean, not to say that it wouldn't have been interesting. It would have been very interesting for Scorsese, especially to make a film from the perspective of the Osage people. I think he's never afraid to have for lack of a better word, a protagonist who is, as it turns out, morally bankrupt or just misled to the point of being evil, which is I think what happens with DiCaprio's character. Because I think here's a question for you, really quickly. Do you think he actually loved her?
I think he does. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I think he does.
Yeah.
I think a lot of his behaviour, and again, going back to that sort of white guilt thing that I think the film handles quite really well.
Yeah, Scorsese, old Catholic.
Guilt.
Stuff,
yeah. It's like about how these things happen, and about how some people are complicit to it, and it's the great tragedy of the film that even though something as pure as love, which I do think he feels towards her, is undermined by that sort of fear. Yeah, the fear of upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. You know what I mean? Or in this case, his uncle, who's this obviously very powerful figure in his life. Yeah. There's that fear about going against him. Yep. I think there's obviously I think there is, a desire to take what's allegedly his, which again is troubling, increasingly so as the film goes on. Yeah. But I do think there is something in there in terms of it. I think there is something vaguely genuine in his relationship with her.
I totally think you're right. Yeah.
Which makes it even more disturbing, I think.
Yeah.
If it was a bit more straight-laced in that context, it would still be fucking horrible. But the idea that you can love someone and then still knowingly destroy their life quietly, it gives that thematic element of the film, the broader thematic element, more potency. Yeah, because completely. It speaks the idea about how. It wasn't just the sort of overt mass murder of the people that destroyed that put them in that position. It was the slow destruction of everything, their culture, their way of life, who they were, all through the guise of friendship. Yeah. And I think in that context it really works.
It's funny, it's almost like he's been duped into thinking that this land is his and the money is kind of his and belongs to him and it's his birthright. Yeah. But also the human side of him is like, but I still want to love, right? And I've met someone who I'm genuinely delighted to be around, but it has to be on my terms, and she has to come into my life and adopt my values, but I still love her. It's it's really
it's bizarre,
interesting.
Isn't it?
It's one of the real strengths of the film, I thought.
Yeah. What about the runtime?
I don't know. I'm denied about this. I thought that it was really well paced. I thought that weirdly the soundtrack kind of helps with that. It's got like a beat to it quite a lot of the time. Yeah. It was never disinteresting. I think it could have been 2 hours 45 though. Like I really do. And even like right at the end, there's title cards which explain what happened to a bunch of the characters afterwards, and you're like, this is a 3.5 hour film. Why are you giving me? You could have put all that in the film. If you're going to make it 3.5 hours, don't do the expository thing. I don't like that. 7 years later, this happened. This happened. Yeah. I'm like, you're just lazy. I'm sorry, Thelma. But I do think it's too long. And I know, again, I said it earlier, it's a stock criticism that people have about long films. It's too long, but it is too long. It could have been 2 hours 45, but I think a lot of the stuff they could have cut is just like beautiful landscape shots or like scenes of DiCaprio getting off a train. Stuff like that, not entire scenes. Every scene deserves to be in this film and has a purpose. Even that weird scene at the end where it becomes like a silent play. I quite liked that, and they, have every right to keep that in. But I just think that editing, there's something that could have been done just to kind of trim the fat a little bit to make it still needs to be a long film, right? And the very last shot, especially. Definitely needs to be in there. It's like a drone shot of present day, I think, of Native American celebration, I think it is. And it's a drone shot that kind of goes up. That all that stuff can stay, but Too long, sorry. 2 hours 45. What do you think?
I mean, I think I went to see it with my friend Alex, and he said the same. He was like, it was too long. Like he wasn't bothered by the runtime, but he said there were a lot of shots that could have been trimmed.
Yeah, agreed.
I think there is something in that, but I am maybe sort of showing my sort of romanticised view of it a little bit, and my Scorsese fanboying maybe a bit. But I think if it was anyone else, like a young sort of filmmaker doing it, like
even Ari Aster, maybe, right?
Yeah, but even then, that didn't bother me too much. But like, I don't know, like I think about like the new Batman film. That was 3 hours, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And like, I didn't actually dislike the film. I quite enjoyed that film, but like, I did think 3 hours. This is ridiculous for a Batman film. But with Scorsese, the stage of the life he's in, and given the landscape of the film industry, which he's sort of critiqued about, then again, there are quite a few 3 hour films these days. But I don't know.
It's 3.5 though. This,
yeah,
that extra half an hour that really fucked me off.
Taking the piss. I just think it. I don't know. Maybe it is a much more romantic view, and it's sort of inhibiting my sort of critical faculties a little bit. But I quite liked that about it.
Okay.
It did feel like an ordeal being in there for that long.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, it's just no matter.
I was so sweaty by the end, but I was quite unwell. I drank lots of Lemsip before I went in, and I was just, I think I lost about 3 stone into the chair. But, you know, I don't know. I think it's a valid criticism, and I wouldn't begrudge people for having it. But my romantic view of it is that it was fine.
I think, you know, just despite the really interesting, engaging themes, the pace of it, the ferocity of it, and like the kind of brutal nature of the story, and all of this stuff which is kind of packaged really nicely into this near perfect film. You're like, despite that, you're still testing people's patience. Like, you just are. That is just the nature of 3.5 hours. You can't make people do anything for 3.5 hours, right? Like, it's really difficult. Like, imagine one of the nicest meals you've ever had. You're like, I'm going to make it for myself, and you open the recipe book that you spent 20 quid on because you're like, I must have this dish. And you're like, fucking 3.5 hours. It takes 3.5 hours to cook this. Jesus Christ. Like, even though it's the most delicious thing ever. It's a stupid analogy, by the way. Sorry. But like, it's just like annoying. It's an annoying amount of time to do anything. Apart from maybe sleep. I don't know. But yeah, 2 hours 45, man. Just maybe I'll have a go at blading it down. It'll probably be shit.
And
then I'll come grovelling back to Thelma and be like, I'm sorry I said that on the podcast.
That she's livid.
Hi, Thelma.
Wait, mate, she's livid. What performances? I mean, strong across the board, right? There's no real weaknesses.
Yeah.
Brendan Fraser, because he is taken quite a lot of flack.
Oh no!
I mean, he's obviously he had the what was the phrase it was called when he came back after?
I called it the phrase naissance. It was the Renaissance.
For yours,
yeah, same.
Obviously, the Whale, a film that we reviewed, or talked about quite a while ago now. Both weren't as keen on it, but both.
The performance was great.
Quite a lot of praise for him. It's weird to see him in a film, and he feels like he's really hamming it up. I don't want to talk about him for too long because he's not in the film that much, but he's got a lot of flack for it, and I can see why, because it's a pretty larger than life performance. But it didn't bother me too much.
No, I feel like it's
been overblown a bit.
Yeah, same. I thought it was quite funny.
It was weird. It definitely was weird.
It is, and I think the characters. Apparently, in the book, he's like that as well. So, in the capable hands of Scorsese, you got to think like, I don't think that was Fraser's decision to act it like that. I think that was like in rehearsals. He was told to do that for a reason, and for whatever reason, in the eyes of some, it's backfired. I don't think it has at all. And
no.
I thought it was quite a welcome addition. I was waiting for him to appear, actually. I
kind of forgot that he was supposed to.
3 hours in, I was like, what the fuck's Brendan Fraser?
What the fuck's Brendan? Yeah.
He's on the poster, man.
Was he the poster?
His name was on some of them. Not him. Okay. Not him as.
Just like him, like massive in a poster.
I thought he was good. I thought, I could see why people say that he hammed it up, and it was an odd addition in the context of the other performances, where it's a lot more natural, I suppose. Speaking as an English person who has never been to that part of the world, maybe the accents were massively hammed up as well. I don't know, but
no idea. Sounded pretty good to me.
Yeah. De Niro, great, always great. DiCaprio, great, doing a bit of a De Niro impression at times with his mouth. That kind of like.
I think he was a fantastic performance. I really think this is up there with his best work.
Yeah, I did really rate him, and the ability, just the sort of sheer. The ability to just, I guess, not be afraid to become that character, like, entirely, because there might be an ego thing with certain actors to be like, no, there's got to be some redeeming features about this guy, right? Let's write in that maybe he admits it or something. But he didn't do that. He really went into the, no, this guy is misguided, but ultimately very bad. Gladstone as well. I hope she gets an Oscar nom. I really do. Thought she was great.
I would be surprised if she didn't, to be honest. I know, and I don't mean that in a way that she wouldn't deserve it, because she's superb in the film. But I would be, just the way the Oscars are, I'd be surprised if they didn't.
Agreed.
But no, she's fantastic. I mean, it's there's been a couple of roles this year in films where actresses have either done some TV work or had very limited work and have come into a big release and just absolutely smashed it. I'm thinking like Return to Seoul.
Oh yeah.
Like fantastic, and she's another welcome addition to that sort of little growing cluster of actors sort of popping up seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, I'm not that well versed in TV, so I don't know. I think Gladstone, she was in the TV series or something. Or maybe a few films, like quite small films. I don't know.
I mean, smart casting. For sure, and quite reasonably respectful casting as well. Could have easily cast someone white in it, basically.
I don't think that would chime well with the time these days.
Definitely not.
And I'm not saying that from a critical perspective. I'm just saying that. Thankfully, people are sort of pushing, because it's why wouldn't you have someone from that background in the film? It's
completely, in this day and age. Even like 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been like slightly more commonplace, though. Exodus, Gods and Kings, and that kind of stuff. None of these people are Egyptian.
It's strange.
No, she was great, and like I said earlier, there's about a sizable portion of the film where she's bedridden and doesn't have a lot to do. In terms of like physicality, and the fact that she can still capture your attention and become less of a passive character despite being bedridden is really interesting. I thought that was really cool as well. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, good. Where would it sit for you in the context of his more recent films?
Ahead of The Irishman. Probably ahead of Wolf of Wall Street as well.
Oh, definitely for me,
I think probably better than Silence as well, actually, thinking about it.
I really liked Silence.
We saw it actually at the
we
cinema.
did?
Yeah.
Fucking hell, many moons ago. I think it was an original Cineboys episode, if memory just serves me correctly.
Yeah, because Alfie came to see it as well.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Fucking hell.
Time.
I don't know where it sits. I, in terms of a ranking, which is stupid because I'm the one that asked the question. I definitely think it's better than Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
Is it better than The Irishman? I think so, probably.
Nice.
I mean, I really like The Irishman a lot myself, so it just shows how much I like this one. I'd be interested to know how if I ever get enough time to rewatch it, how it would hold up.
Yeah, same actually. I'm going to rewatch it at some point. It might be a year or two before I pick it up again. Especially because I don't have Apple TV. That's with a streaming platform it's going to be released on. Did you see the old logo at the beginning?
Yeah.
No, I think it's his best film in quite a while, actually. Definitely better than Shutter Island. I quite like Shutter Island, actually. But I don't even want to say return to form, because even his recent work's been great. But I can't really rank it at the moment. It's pretty high up there.
That's a pretty stupid question.
No. I like the idea of ranking it. I just can't. I can't actually.
I always find it really hard to sort of get my head around having the balls to rank everything that he's done, particularly more recently. Cause it's a little bit less clear cut. I think obviously in comparison to a lot of his older work, there's probably an argument that maybe it's not as good as his best stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But I really like, in a way, that because it did feel almost like a gangster film in parts. There were elements of the film that were kind of gangstery.
Yeah, bits like set in the cave, talking about moonshine and the cave, stuff in the cave.
And even like the executions felt sort of quite gang.
They were, yeah. He's so nonchalant about the way he films people getting shot. He doesn't he doesn't dress them up at all. It's
not
just
stylistic either, which I think is important in the presentation of the way of life if you think about the context of his gangster films, it's about that way of life. It's just a fact. And in this particular example, it's just a fact of the time that people, the Osage First Nation people were just being murdered in that fashion. Without remorse. So I think in that way, it's shocking for sure, but
makes it more shocking almost.
But I think it's important in that context that it's framed that way.
Yeah,
I think if it's stylized, you lose something.
You're into Tarantino territory there.
Yes, which in the context of this film and the intention of this film, which is to highlight the plight of the First Nation and what they had to endure, I think it would have been very misguided to do it any other way.
Window dressing up the murder scenes.
Not that Scorsese would, but no, fantastic. Great film.
Definitely good. It is too long, in my opinion, but it is still worthwhile. It's worth your time, I'd say. Yeah, definitely.
Interestingly, I heard a criticism from a few people, actually.
Too short. No.
The film was quite predictable.
Really? Okay. I mean, it's based on
people.
True events. So I mean,
that's kind of how I would felt about that criticism.
Yeah,
I can understand what I get it. I think in the context of Scorsese's work more broadly, it's also quite predictable. But I think
that's true actually.
But I think when you're doing a film that is based on a book that is based on a historical event, it's kind of there isn't really, you can't really be like twisty and turny, can you? You've got to sort of just do the duty with the story you've been given. I mean, the history, which is so important. I
literally didn't consider that as a thing.
I just thought it was an interesting aside before the outro, before we pits off to the outro.
Absolutely,
So it's probably quite a big can of worms to throw in at the end. But
oh my god, so much to say all of a sudden. It's gripping. That's what I'd say. So it doesn't matter if I didn't even. I wasn't trying to predict it.
No.
So in that sense,
I was happy to have my hand held.
Yeah.
It felt like the Scorsese's really good at that experience, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. Nice. Right, great. Outro.
Ooh, no, I'm joking. Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it.
Yes.
Good to sort of ease back into the world of podcasting by discussing one of the most anticipated films for me. Anyway, the last few months.
Oh yeah, definitely.
One of the big boys, the big man.
Yeah. Highly anticipated release.
Yeah, good film. Good film.
Yes.
Next week. So we've got a little bit of a we've got a few films lined up, 2.
Yeah.
So the first one is going to be The Killer.
Yes.
David Fincher on Netflix at the moment. I haven't seen it yet. You have?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. You're a big Fincher fanboy, aren't you? By your own admission.
I think in the last 2 or 3 years, I've realised just how much I like him.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of bad words to say about Fincher. So yeah, I know you like him as.
I love him. Well, great. I don't think I like him as much as you.
Okay,
but I am a big fan. We do want to discuss him in a deep dive, so I'm sort of reticent to say that he'll be a big part of the discussion. Obviously, there'll be elements of it because you can't not talk about his work when discussing any of his films, because there's a lot of certainly visual and thematic motifs that carry through all of his films.
Very distinguishable.
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of the most distinguishable modern filmmakers, certainly stylistically speaking. I think.
Yeah, you just know it's him.
Yeah, a mile off. We'll talk a little bit about Fincher. We'll also talk about the Hitman in cinema, Hitman films.
Yeah,
a topic we've not discussed.
No, it's such a huge area of amazing and sometimes shite films that it's just it's like almost like the boxing film as a in the sense that there are more than you'd expect.
Yeah.
I guess
it is a genre, maybe like a subgenre, really, because it tends to be under the the umbrella of like action or thriller.
Yes.
So but I think as a subgenre, I think after a bit of cursory research, we're going to be more surprised than we already are about how many sort of Hitman films that exist. The week after that, Napoleon.
Yes.
Again, a film that I'm quite intrigued about. Trailer didn't necessarily sell it to me, to be honest. I thought, Joaquin Phoenix, great, visually stunning, but the use of soundtrack and stuff, I just feel like we're going to get something that isn't going to be that concerned with history.
Yeah,
which isn't necessarily which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, like, I don't know, we can maybe get into that and talk about what the responsibility of a historical biopic is in terms of particularly a film that clearly has its eye on, you know, broad appeal. But yeah, that's a couple of weeks away. So yeah, first up, Fincher, the Hitman film, The Killer. Week after that, Napoleon, the historical biopics in general, and a bit about Ridley Scott.
Yeah, sounds good. Nice.
Lovely.
Nice.
In the meantime, enjoy this episode. It's great to be back. We love you.
We love you too.
We love you so much.
Yes.
Too. We love you too. We're just expecting they'll go telling us that, you know, that they love us. Yeah. Have a good week. Lots of love. Bye bye.
See ya.